It is therefore ordered that you shall be put to death by electrocution, the mode prescribed by law, and that you shall be transferred to the custody of the warden at the Tennessee Prison and further on the 12th day of January, 1997, your body shall be...
On September 30th, 2026, the state of Tennessee is planning on carrying out a death penalty sentence, and if it follows through, will be the first time a woman has been executed in the state in nearly 200 years. The woman's name is Christa Pike, who was convicted of the brutal torture murder of 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer when she was 18 years old. Driven by jealousy and obsession, Pike, along with two others, Darrell Shipp and Shadola Peterson, would carry out one of the most disturbing crimes in Tennessee's history. A crime that was so shocking, in fact, that it would go on to be featured in several true crime documentaries, programs, and news reports. This is the story of Christa Pike, one of the youngest women ever to be sentenced to death in the United States. West Virginia, 1976. Nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, the state is home to fewer than 2 million people. Most residents live in quiet, rural communities scattered across its valleys and hills. It was in this state that Christa Pike would be born to parents Carissa Hansen and Emil Glenn Pike. For a good portion of her childhood, Pike would be raised in the state alongside her older half-sister. However, Pike's home life was marked by conflict and a tumultuous relationship between her parents. After being married for 2 years, Pike's parents would file for divorce after Hansen was discovered to have been cheating on her husband. However, the two would then remarry after Hansen attempted suicide and stayed together for 2 years before once again splitting up. Pike's aunt would note that as a baby, Pike would be, quote, crawling around through piles of dog stool all over the house. Her mother was described as living a lifestyle of carousing, even after receiving news that her child was experiencing severe seizures. For most of Pike's childhood, she was taken care of by her paternal grandparents. In fact, Christa had considered her grandmother to be the only who ever truly loved her. While a third-grade student, Pike would attempt to take her own life by overdosing on acetaminophen. After this incident, she would receive psychiatric treatment and care, as well as therapy at differing times. However, when she was 12, she would again try to end her life in 1988 after her grandmother passed away. After this attempt, she did not receive the same care as the first one. Throughout her teenage years, her life was unstable and marked by violence. One of her mother's boyfriends had punched her in the face after she chased him with a butter knife. Criminal charges had been filed over this incident, which were later settled. At one point, while staying with her father and his new family, one of her younger half-sisters claimed to have been assaulted by Pike. Because of this, her father would kick her out of the house. Pike claimed that she had also been assaulted at several points in her life. However, these claims were met with doubt and skepticism by those who were close to her, as Pike was known to be a pathological liar. Despite this, Pike was considerably intelligent and had decent performance in school. However, her unstable home life made it so that she frequently changed schools. This would affect her performance and cause her grades to decline. In the 10th grade, Pike would be sent to a juvenile facility for a year, where she eventually became interested in a program known as Job Corps. Job Corps was a government program that was aimed at helping low-income youth by offering things like career assistance and training. Pike would complete her GED program and wanted to start training as a nursing assistant. In 1994, Pike attended the Job Corps Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is currently no longer in operation. The Job Corps centers were notorious for being full of crime, as the many youth would live in dorms and conflict was frequently observed. While in Knoxville, Pike would start training in computer programming. She would meet a young boy named Darrell Shipp, who was younger than her. The two would begin to grow an interest in the occult and worshiping the devil. According to Pike's social worker at the time, Debbie Howell Birchfield, it was apparently not unusual for groups of youth to express an interest in devil worship. However, it tended to be limited to reading and drawing pictures. Birchfield would also state that it seemed that Pike would deliberately commit minor rule infractions frequently in order to continue delaying her eligibility for release from the facility. According to Birchfield, Pike seemed uncertain about what she would do once she left. During her time in the Job Corps Center, Pike would become convinced that a student from Florida, 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, was trying to steal her boyfriend. People who knew Slemmer disputed that this was the case, but Pike seemed very sure of it. Pike had told Ship at some point that she wanted to teach Slemmer a lesson and would insult her behind her back. While she was 18 years old, Pike and a friend of hers named Shadola Peterson, who was also 18, worked up a plan to try and lure Slemmer to an abandoned steam mill, which was part of the University of Tennessee's campus. The mill was close to the Job Corps Center and was at a relatively walkable distance. However, it was secluded, settled deep in the woods, and the likelihood of someone stumbling upon the area was slim. On the night of January 12, 1995, Pike told Slemmer that she wanted to make peace and offered to smoke some weed with her. Slemmer believed that Pike wanted to genuinely work things out, and so she agreed. Before leaving for the mill, though, Pike hid with her two objects, a box cutter and a small meat cleaver. Pike, Slemmer, Ship, and Peterson would all start out from the dormitories and take a dark jogging trail to the mill. Once they were completely in the forest and isolated from the center, Pike began to accuse Slemmer of trying to sleep with Ship. Slemmer denied the accusations, but this did nothing to calm Pike down. And at this point, Pike would knee Slemmer in the face. Downed from the shock of the hit, Pike then proceeded to use the meat cleaver to slice at Slemmer's stomach. Ship would jump in to help at this point, cutting Slemmer across the chest as well. Slemmer would cry out for them to stop, but the three attackers did not respond. Over the next 30 to 40 minutes, Pike, Ship, and Peterson would brutally and viciously torture Slemmer. Ship would then carve a pentagram into Slemmer's chest. Slemmer was still alive by this point, but Pike would pick up a large chunk of asphalt from nearby and then slam it into Slemmer's head, killing her. Even more horrifying, Pike would keep a piece of Slemmer's skull with her as some sort of morbid souvenir. Afterwards, the three returned to the school where Pike would proceed to begin showing off the piece of the skull to anyone she knew. Within 36 hours of the grisly act, the three would be arrested. Detectives traced the fact that Pike, Ship, Peterson, and Slemmer had left, and all but Slemmer returned to the facility. They also found that Pike was keeping the piece of the skull in her jacket pocket. Police would also find a satanic Bible and an altar in Ship's room. Soon after being arrested, Pike confessed to torturing and killing Slemmer, but insisted that they had merely been trying to scare her and that the entire thing got out of control. Pike, Ship, and Peterson would all be charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Ship, who had turned 17 just 2 months before the murder, was still tried as an adult. Peterson agreed to become a witness for the prosecution and, as a result, would receive probation. She would also plead guilty to being an accessory after the fact. The prosecution decided that they would seek out life without parole for Ship, but for Pike, they wanted to go the full length and seek out the death penalty. During the trial, the evidence was stacked in the favor of the prosecution. University of Tennessee anthropologist Murray Marks was brought in to testify how the skull fragment fit into Slemmer's skull perfectly. They also brought coroner Dr. Sandra Elkins to describe the wounds in full detail, while Pike cried in the background.
This is the skull from the victim. This is a portion of skull. Obviously, I already had the skull. I took the piece and placed it where it belonged on the skull.
What was the cause of death?
Blunt force injuries to the head or blows.
Pike would be charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. And on March 22, 1996, the jury would begin deliberation. It only took them a few hours to find her guilty on both counts, and on March 30th, Pike would be sentenced to death by electrocution for the murder charge and 25 years in prison for the conspiracy charge.
At the Tennessee Prison for Women, And further, on the 12th day of January 1997, your body shall be subjected to shock by sufficient current of electricity. Oh God, have mercy upon you. Mr. Bates, take Mr. Pike into the house.
Can I please have my mom before I go?
Mr. Bates, please hold Miss Pike in the dock.
Please, let me just love my mom.
Please hold Miss Pike in the dock.
Oh, and I love you. I love you too. And I love you too.
Shipp was found guilty on both counts, but the jury could not reach a decision on if he should spend the rest of his life in prison. The presiding judge would sentence him to life in prison with the eligibility of parole. However, the judge would impose a consecutive 25-year sentence for his conspiracy conviction, making it so that Shipp could not be eligible for parole until he was in his late 40s or early 50s. Shipp will become eligible for parole starting in January 2026.
Christa was born, she was spending a lot of time with her grandmother. I wanted to be her friend, and I thought that maybe that would help us to be able to be closer together, so we did smoke marijuana together.
While in prison, a jailer named Deborah Wade would testify on March 30th, 1996, that after Pike was sentenced to death, she sat in the jail's holding cell to write a letter to Shipp. Pike gave the letter to Wade, who then passed it on to her supervisor, and the letter eventually found its way to the district attorney. In the letter, Pike wrote to Shipp asking him to tell the police that he lied in his statement and to go along with hers. She then expressed how she was apparently being nice to Slemmer, as instead of letting her bleed to death, she bludgeoned her instead. She asked Shipp to tell his lawyer that she would be willing to testify for him and called him her little devil. While in prison, on August 24th, 2001, Pike and fellow inmate Natasha Cornett would attack and attempt to strangle inmate Patricia Jones with a shoestring. They nearly succeeded in choking her to death but failed. Tennessee's Department of Corrections maintained that Cornett had assisted in the crime, but after investigating, they were unable to bring sufficient evidence. Pike would later be convicted of attempted first-degree murder in 2003. And received a 25-year sentence for attacking Jones. Following her guilty verdict, Pike would try to appeal her conviction in the state courts. In June 2001 and then in June 2002, against the advice of her lawyers, she asked the courts to drop her appeal and sought to be executed instead. Criminal Court Judge Mary Beth Lebowitz granted the request and set an execution date of August 19th, 2002. However, after this, Pike would change her mind, and on July 8, 2002, the defense lawyers would file a motion to allow the appeal process to continue. The motion was denied. However, on August 2, 2002, a three-judge state appeals court panel ruled that the proceedings should continue, and the execution would not be carried out. In December 2008, Pike's request for a new trial was turned down, and she would be returned to death row. That had been her final ability to appeal at the state level.
3 hours a day. And for going on almost 12 years, that's a long time. I'm only out of my room 1 hour a day, and that's just in another cage, it's like a dog cage, a kennel. So I'm either in a box or in a kennel, and that's pretty much it. I don't even remember what it feels like to be free. I've lived in here longer than I've ever lived any one place in my life.
In March 2012, it was revealed that Pike had apparently made escape plans involving corrections officer Justin Heflin, as well as Donald Kohut of New Jersey. Investigators were never able to piece when the escape plan discussion began, but Kohut was a personal trainer and had been in his early 30s. He entered into a letter-writing correspondence with Pike around the beginning of 2011, and by July of that year he was traveling from New Jersey to Tennessee to visit her in person once or twice a month. Eventually, Kohut would communicate a plan to help her escape and enlisted the help of Officer Heflin, who agreed to participate in return for cash and gifts. An unsealed indictment revealed that they had been planning on copying a prison key, among other plans that were not revealed by the Department of Corrections. Early in 2012, prison personnel received information about the plot and a joint investigation involving the Department of Corrections and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the New Jersey State Police. According to the TBI, the plan was not very far along. Kohut would be arrested and charged with bribery and conspiracy to commit escape, while Heflin was charged with bribery, official misconduct, and conspiracy to commit escape. Pike was not charged, and it was unclear to the investigators if she was a participant in the conspiracy other than being aware of it. Kohut was sentenced to 7 years and would serve them at the Tennessee State Northeast Correctional Complex. Heflin cooperated with authorities and served no prison time but was fired from his job. In May 2014, Pike's lawyers would try to appeal at the federal level. Her lawyers sought a commutation of the sentence from death to prison, claiming that there was ineffective assistance of counsel, that Pike suffered from mental illness, and that Tennessee's capital punishment was unconstitutional. U.S. District Judge Harry Sandlin Mattis Jr. would pen a 61-page ruling, rejecting all grounds and denying the commutation. On August 22, 2019, a 3-judge U.S. Court of Appeals panel would unanimously uphold the lower court's ruling and deny relief. By 2020, Tennessee Attorney General Herbert Slattery's office would request an execution date to be set for Pike. However, due to the pandemic and other factors, the court granted Pike's attorneys an extension to try and argue as to why Pike should not be executed. In 2021, Pike's attorneys filed a motion to oppose the execution date and request a commutation, but the motion was denied. In November 2022, the state Supreme Court found that Tennessee's law for juveniles to be automatically sentenced to life in prison without parole was unconstitutional in the State v. Booker ruling. On August 20th, 2023, Pike's lawyers tried to use this as an attempt to reopen her bid to have her 1996 conviction and sentence thrown out, arguing that her young age and damaged mental health should spare her from execution. In October 2023, Knox County Criminal Court Judge Scott Green denied the request, saying that State v. Booker did not apply to her and that it only addressed juvenile offenders in Tennessee and not adults. At the time of the murder, Pike had been an adult, and as such, it would not apply to her. On September 30th, 2025, Pike would be issued a death warrant by the Tennessee Supreme Court, and her execution would be scheduled to take place 1 year later, on September 30th, 2026. If Pike is executed, she will be the first woman to be executed in the state of Tennessee in nearly 200 years.
The Tennessee Supreme Court has set an execution date for Christa Pike. The court granted the state's motion after ruling Pike had exhausted her and presented no extenuating circumstances for commutation. Pike was sentenced to the death for the 1995 murder of Colleen Slemmer and remains the only woman on Tennessee's death row. Her execution is scheduled for September 30th, 2026 at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, unless a higher court or other authority issues a stay.